Good morning and welcome to our next Spark Lab and Future of the Future event. I'm Stephen Knightley. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Rocketworks, which is a video game studio based in Dunedin and Auckland. And I'm also a board member of the New Zealand Game Developers Association. So that's why I'm particularly excited about today's presentation. As always, we have arranged a high-speed, high-impact briefing that brings high-class innovation and delivers inspiration that can help you and other New Zealand businesses really find an edge. And the format today is a talk, followed by a Q&A session where we get to address some of the questions that you have submitted and sent in. Today, we are joined all the way from Seattle by Chris Novak, who is the head of Xbox Research and Design. And Chris is world-class, high-caliber speaker. He spent 17 years working with Microsoft on some of their largest product launches for both games and online platforms. And with lead times that span years, those projects have to have real vision about how technology might change during that time, how users might change, and how the use cases might change. And that means predicting behaviors. And that's an intrinsic part of gaming in particular, but that's something that Chris will really talk about today and explain how it's relevant for both the world of consumer gaming, but also other parts of business. Because the gaming industry has really evolved in leaps and bounds over the decades, from my days on a Commodore 64 as a child through to modern gaming technology today, which might include the latest augmented reality or cloud technology in it. And it's now an industry that far exceeds Hollywood in size and scale. And that's even the case here in New Zealand. It's a little known fact that New Zealand has a $750 million games industry of its own. And of the games that are made in New Zealand, we export about $250 million, which makes our creative technology, our interactive media industry, larger than our local music or even local film sector. So that's a real opportunity and something to celebrate in its own right. But as the industry has grown, so have our expectations for it in terms of what a game should deliver and how it can add value in society and in business, not just as a form of entertainment. And so today, Chris is going to share his perspectives on moving technology forward, not just to record the great moments we've had in the past, but to catalyze a more playful future. So ladies and gentlemen, Chris Novak.
Thanks, Stephen. It's really great to be here. One quick note about today. My professional career is in gaming, so many of the topics relate to games, but today is not specifically about Xbox. There are no product announcements, no hints, and I'm also not mentioning anyone else's specific product. Today is just about bringing a gamer's voice to an overall design and technology conversation, one I believe broader than gaming. When I use the word we today, I'm typically referring to anyone involved in building the experiences everyone uses throughout their day. I also need to thank Deborah Henderson, because what I'm about to share with you is an extension of a conversation she and I have been having on and off for a while now. I value her expertise tremendously. In terms of my professional background, it's rooted in game design, where since the 90s I've focused on mechanics, storytelling, immersion, and other areas about how people have fun, connecting them to that fun. What it feels like to match patterns in any game in order to master it, or how people are motivated by different things, whether that's competition, collection, socialization. In many ways, I've grown up with the industry. When I started, if you told someone you made games, they just looked at you and asked, "That's a real job?" I remember the industry being compared to the size of Hollywood, and I never thought much of it. But then one day, Jack Black sent a photo of himself standing in front of the congratulations screen from Project Gotham Racing 2, which he had beaten on Platinum, a mode I helped tune. There's a timer on that screen, so I knew he had poured hundreds of hours into that accomplishment. At that moment, I knew that even if I watched every movie he'd ever make, that I'd have spent more of his free time than he'd have spent of mine. For some reason, that moment always stuck with me. And yeah, it is a real job. People love games. Which brings me to today. The concepts are rooted in gaming, and I believe extend into areas outside of gaming, areas many of you can push forward in unique ways, ways I've never thought of. We're going to start with play. The act of play is universal. Play is how we learn, whether that's learning about object permanence and physics as a child, how to act socially or as part of a team, or how to deal with challenge and success. Play brings us emotion, mastery, and storytelling. Gaming is just structured play, rules and rewards. The interesting thing about gaming is that there are lots of people who play games who don't consider themselves gamers. even if they play for hours a day. Much of what I've discovered about great games harkens back to very basic human needs. Play connected us locally for hundreds of generations, and social psychologists would say the proximity principle of playing pickup games with the people around you led to long-lasting interpersonal relationships. Physical connection expanded to emotional connection. Those connections, that community, is good for our individual and collective health. The 75-year happiness study conducted by Harvard found that it turns out that people who are more socially connected to family, to friends, to community are happier, they're physically healthier, and they live longer than people who are less well-connected. Good relationships keep us happier and healthier, period. I believe that a more widespread sense of community is good for the world, and that play helps us build it. It's why I'm passionate about gaming. But play and gaming is just one form of connection, just one example of fun. Now, technology has connected us unlike any time in human history. Technology has built an amazing thing over the last 35 years, an easily referenced memory of human history, a shared history. We've told stories, drawn pictures, and written things down for millennia, but much of that history was challenging to access, as it was hidden, drawn on a rock in a faraway location, written in a book tucked away on a shelf, or heard only around the small campfire where it was told. Today, our digital memory can be referenced in an instant, from the palm of your hand, from almost anywhere. What a child can access and do with a cell phone today is unimaginable 100 years ago. How many photos do you have of your great-grandparents? How about their parents? 1, maybe 2? Contrast that to future generations, which will be able to remember you and view your entire timeline and location by day for your entire life, assuming, of course, you chose to share that. In 2003, Mark Lieberman calculated the storage requirements for all human speech ever spoken at 42 zettabytes if digitized as 16 kilohertz 16-bit audio. In 2018, IDC estimated the global datasphere would reach 175 zettabytes by 2025. So imagine not just having a photograph or two of your great-grandparents, but if you could instantly reference just a tiny portion of what they'd ever said, the things they wanted to pass down to future generations in perfect fidelity. Perhaps it'd be the story of how they survived the Titanic, or how they fell in love with one another, or simply their secret recipe for strawberry rhubarb pie. 175 zettabytes is a lot of information. Today, many individuals are helping with the huge amount of work required to digitize previous methods of recording history and making it accessible. Things like the citizenship records and family trees, providing the ability to trace yourself back to someone famous or infamous. Technology is building the tools necessary for us to share our digital memories. Many of us are beginning to appreciate professions like library and information science as we dabble in it on our nights and weekends, striving to add and organize our shared digital memories. Our organization and curation of this information changes the collective memory we're building. I remember listening to a lecturer many years ago citing that the way people remember things is different than how they experience them in the moment. There are many studies around memory citing things like the unreliability of witness accounts during dramatic encounters, but this overview of memory was new. What caught my attention was the discussion around the duration of an experience being different than how it's remembered. For instance, a 2-week vacation doesn't mean you will remember it twice as fondly as if you'd stayed there for 1 week. What you remember are the events which were outliers, the things outside of the expected patterns. The 3 amazing things you encountered on that vacation. No matter its duration, that's what sticks. It was fascinating because I realized this was what made certain games really speak to me, but I had never explicitly recognized it. The patterns used in game mechanics aren't often the things you remember about a game. It's the outlier events you remember, the stories from the 1 in a million event, the way a game's mechanics allow for expressions of mastery and creativity. The other interesting detail in this presentation was the discussion around remembering decisions. It turns out that you remember being happy about having made a decision and knowing what the outcome was, rather than feeling trapped by wondering what could have been. I realized that I had been integrating this into my own designs for years, although unconsciously. I often tried to make my games recognize when players were doing something out of the ordinary. For instance, there was a racing game I worked on which took place in real cities. We had taken photos of every storefront and mapped those cities out in incredible detail. When we had that game in the playtest lab, I noticed a few individuals driving around slowly, not actually racing. When I asked one of them what they were doing, they said they were remembering their trip to that city. This person was driving around in the game until they found the tattoo shop where years ago They decided on a whim to get their first tattoo. And now, thousands of miles away from home in a different country, that very same storefront was in the game right in front of them. We added an achievement to that game called the photographer for people when they just drove around and looked at things, even though we expected them to be racing. We wanted them to know that even the way that they were playing things was right, even if it was outside of the norm. Ensuring the things I worked on took a more purposeful stance on what people remembered became something I focused on ever since. How do you land events in what's referred to as episodic memory, where the feelings associated with the memory reside, as opposed to semantic memory, which is more factual? It's those feelings captured in episodic memories that make for passionate storytelling and passionate games. Technology is also building experiences, allowing us to consume one another's stories. Today, we have a popular consumption paradigm, the endless scroll, the feed. It's an amazing creation. You can look back in time. It's possible to keep up with everyone you know, to share interests with those you don't know, to see through a celebrity's eyes, or to hear news from anywhere on the planet. Not only can you keep up, but you can share what you're doing right now for others to keep up with. It's a billion little channels to tune into. Everything on that endless scroll can be mashed up, tweaked, liked, subscribed, leveraged, and turned into something even larger, funnier, or more concise. From a creative standpoint, it's an explosion of content to work with. What's interesting is that when you look at today's consumption experiences, many can be very long form. You can scroll forever, but they are made up of highly curated short form content. We know that much of this short form content took a long time for someone to create, to curate. The killer one-liner, the 50th take of the amazing basketball shot, the photo to share to an awesome screenshot club with other gamers. This curation is a method of telling stories. But the user experience for sharing stories and experiences often stops at a few seconds ago. We're refining our ability to connect with one another and what went on last night, or a few minutes ago, or a few seconds ago. We build notifications so when we're not keeping tabs, technology does that for us. We build special notifications to ensure we don't miss the ones we really care about. We build interfaces that allow people to peek at things if that's all the time they have while standing in a line or walking to the bus. This is both wonderful and difficult. Wonderful that we have this shared memory. Difficult in that we also know what we've missed out on. What could we have done last night? Or what could we be doing right now if only we knew? So we keep checking. We're addicted to checking. We can access our shared memory so well now that we're afraid of missing out in the present. We can be out of balance. Knowing that you missed out because it's hard to see can be hard. Technology has built patterns to remember the past, but if we relate this experience to people, there's a critical component to technology to capture: the power of anticipation, the power of hope, the power of thinking about the future. Some of these UX patterns will be new. Some will be extensions of things like an activity feed, and some will be entirely new applications and experiences. But I believe this is a hugely untapped area to make technology do even more for people. Research shows that humans value the future more than they value the present or past. Thinking about future events tend to produce stronger, more positive effects than thinking about past events. It is the anticipated enjoyment of events, not the actual enjoyment, that drives people to act. Anticipation is its own reward, literally triggering dopamine release in the brain. As anticipated enjoyment goes up, the amount of work people are willing to put up to accomplish a goal goes up. Anticipation drives positive engagement. What if we weren't afraid of missing out, but confident our future would be the best it can be? What if we could scroll into that future? What if we could not only connect with our past, but catalyze our future? What if that thing I carried around in my pocket, my phone, being connected to everything and everyone, meant that my evening, my tomorrow, my weekend, my 6 months from now, were more connected to play or more connected to anything else I deemed fun? Memory does not primarily exist to think about the past. It primarily exists to help us know what to do in the present and to plan for the future. Look at any neurological system, and there is one commonality. The brain is a predictive machine. The brain optimizes for the future. That's why your hand forms the shape of a cup as you reach for one. It's how you recognize the shapes of words and sentences. It's what you anticipate saying to a friend when they greet you. Game designers have taken advantage of the brain's desire to pattern match and anticipate the future for years. Whether it's showing the next tile in Tetris, the tantalizing remainder of an experience bar about to go ding, or the slowdown during the wind-up of a punch animation. Each of these juices up the brain to anticipate what is to come. Each provides visceral effect. Games typically teach these mechanics and then add layer upon layer upon layer. What was previously an impossible situation becomes instantly recognizable. What you had to think hard about becomes muscle memory. The best games aren't simply about mastering these patterns, about learning the response that the game designer thought was best, but in using these patterns to make the situation fit how you, the player, wanted things to pan out. There's a striking parallel between what technology has developed over the past 35 years, that worldwide collective digital memory, and the opportunity we have as technologists. We can leverage that digital memory to boost the way people use their own memory, to optimize for the future. Earlier, I used the word catalyze very specifically when I mentioned one's future. I use it in contrast to words like schedule or predict. Today, much of technology around us uses scheduling and prediction as the metaphor. I believe we should endeavor to add the verb catalyze to our experiential tool belt, as it can help with some of the frictions associated with scheduling and prediction. Prediction is amazing when it's applied to something like the weather. On a grand scale, predicting storm paths has saved countless lives. On a small scale, predicting a foot of fresh snow means we're starting the neighborhood snowball fight. We build in expectations about the variability of weather predictions, and those predictions keep us safe. But we don't extend that same buffer when it comes to technology predicting me. I don't know meteorology, so weather predictions which are mostly right are super helpful. But I know myself, and predictions which are mostly right about me just feel flat out wrong. Prediction is often awkward when you apply it to a person's future. It's disempowering as well. It implies that users are predictable, that I am predictable. There's a wonderful utility in predicting that I'm about to drive to work and drawing my attention to a stall on my normal route. But applying to prediction to many situations, especially social ones, brings a bunch of things that people don't like. They don't want to be predictable. It's boring. They don't want technology knowing everything about them without their consent. They want to be free, private. What users want is the difference between predicting the weather, where the user can simply respond, and changing the weather. This empowerment allows the user to do what they really wanted to, whether that's a snowball fight because it's cold or sunbathing because it's hot. Obviously, we can't change the weather, but we can build interfaces where we're less focused on predicting what someone is going to do and rather choose to focus on catalyzing what they wish would happen. If you're connected to everything and everyone, why shouldn't you have the most amazing weekend possible? Rather than seeing the good time someone had in Vegas last weekend, isn't it more powerful to feel confident that you're going to be there this weekend? This brings us to scheduling. Scheduling things has two hotspots when it comes to fun or the future. First, scheduling is formal and leaves room for what's called social spoiling. That formality, that official invitation leaves room for rejection, and no one likes rejection. It's no fun. The second hotspot is the work involved. Scheduling takes work. The worst case is having done the work up front to put yourself out there only to have that event rejected or minimized, and then having to deal with the follow-up of the logistics. Of the many verbs we leverage within any user experience, I believe catalyze to be uniquely powerful as a discrete method, a method applied to future experiences. It's a partnership where the user's explicit signal can overshadow experiences where they're trying to predict or schedule their desires. Thinking about the future is also an important component to mental health. Research notes that the absence of positive thoughts and feelings about the future, although subtler, is nevertheless as serious of a problem, perhaps even more so, than the presence of negative thoughts and feelings. xCloud further cites studies which show that future events were rated as more personally significant than past events in a sample with an average age of 72. Take a tour of most any social application or experience today, and very little of it is focused on the future. I posit that if experiences were better balanced between reflecting on past activity of others and time spent catalyzing what could be going on in the future with them, that we would do tremendous good for people. How might we be able to scroll into the future in order to catalyze it? How might we make tonight, tomorrow, or 6 months from now even more fun for people? A moment you can feel confident in, that you can revel in the anticipation of, and that others can naturally rally around. This type of interface and interaction is one I believe has tremendous opportunity for designers and technologists to explore. The optimism expressed in the research related to one's future is simply uplifting. These interface patterns have not been explored deeply. Let's take the endless scroll of the activity feed we mentioned earlier and think through the most basic form of extending it into the future. Perhaps there are things you know you're going to do, but you'd love to have friends join in? What if you could simply drop a photo of your bike or the place you're going to ride with a quick question of, up for a ride tonight? What if you could post a screenshot of the new game you're certainly going to play with it comes out next month? What if a simple click was all it took to purposely extend options into the future for someone else? And let's go beyond the things you knew that were going to happen. Let's talk about the things you wish would happen sometime, anytime. A trip to Vegas, indoor skydiving, learning how to dance, cooking a full pig in an underground pit. Something crazy, something fun. In the simple theoretical feat we're discussing, even a single slot for today, tomorrow, this weekend, and someday would provide 4 explicit signals of something you wish would come true in the future. When we take these signals and extend them into other people's feeds, it allows that endless scroll to move across the past, present, and now into the future. Most importantly, we have a chance to connect our futures together, literally to catalyze something from nothing. I'd like to do that with you as well, replaces liking what already happened. A rich discussion based in anticipation of the upcoming events adds energy and creates gravity for others to join. We know anticipation of an event makes people happy simply by thinking about it. If we expand beyond an individual's well-being and think about an entire community, I believe the healthiest communities will be the ones where members anticipate, desire, and catalyze future interactions with one another. Certainly this is the case with gamers, where a top-rated goal for many is to play with friends more often. I suspect this desire applies to more hobbies. To foster community, we must focus earlier, leveraging anticipation and excitement. Anticipation will not only help motivate the community, research indicates it's likely to have a positive social impact as well. Because when participants anticipate interaction with others, they optimize for that interaction. This is just like that predictive shaping of the hand to grab a cup. In the case of social interaction, participants predictably shape their mental model to increase the odds the interaction will go well. When people anticipate interacting with someone, they remember more about them and behave more cooperatively if they believe it will be a long-term interaction. Easily sharing visions of fun activities or any desired activity in the future creates shared goals. We've known for decades that people work together and form new relationships when they share a common goal. Understanding shared goals even reduces conflict. Sharing goals is an important element within any game's design, especially after massively multiplayer online games came to the fore, where banding together to go through a raid that can only be accomplished with 20 people working together is part of the reason guilds form. Goals bring us together. Thing is, in order to find someone with the same specific goal, you often have to be in a very small community. And it's work to figure out which friend may be in that community. Work basically no one will do. There's too much of it, especially to discover something more whimsical, more wishful, or out of your norm, something purely fun. Extending an existing interaction pattern to better support a view into the future helps bring this work to zero. You stop at what catches your eye on something you too would love to happen, even if you've never really expressed to anyone that, yeah, I'd love to try indoor skydiving. Now it's far simpler to connect with someone else who also wishes that would happen. Imagine being able to select any picture and being able to slide that into your wish list for the future, the equivalent of being above the fold in your feed, a simple tweak with far-reaching impact. In this example, the framing of the desire to try out indoor skydiving wasn't a formal, explicit invitation, but an implicit one. This nuance is important, as the difference in social dynamic and expectation is vast. An explicit formal invitation means you're asking people to respond, and the chances here are a strong no, because you have to sift through your entire network to find the one person in your graph who would also appreciate going indoor skydiving, or starting the largest snowball fight in your neighborhood's history, or gaming all weekend. We can balance commenting on the past with catalyzing the future. I believe as designers and technologists, we can bring fun into people's futures more often. I believe we can make more dreams come true. I believe we can make it easier to bring people together to try something new. This should be the confidence that technology provides us. We just need to reframe the patterns we've created across technology so that the same ease of consumption of past activities works to catalyze future activities, and not just for play, but for other things people enjoy. Technology can do many things, and catalyzing a future where we always have more to look forward to is a worthwhile pursuit, and one that I think we all want to be part of. Thank you.
Chris, thank you. Well, that was fascinating and really insightful, so thank you for that. And you've really given us a wealth of insight, both on your journey so far, as well as how you see the potential in all of our futures. So we're going to get into the questions that we've had come in so far. There's been a lot of them. We'd love to get through many of them. And while you've been looking at our more playful future, there's also a lot of questions about our more immediate technology future as well. So making the past or marking the past is a very subservient use of the technology. And what you're proposing, what you seem to be proposing, seems something far more active, looking to the future. How critical is AI, is artificial intelligence, to this prediction? And are there any boundaries we need to apply there to avoid it becoming like intrusive or overstepping boundaries?
For sure. I mean, I made the distinction between catalyze and predict, and that was very purposeful. The role of the user and making sure that they have agency is critical. Because today, we're trying, you can do so many things to try and figure out what somebody is likely to do. But frankly, just giving the user agency and acting in service of that user and acting with their explicit intent is so valuable. So AI is tremendous at doing things which provide utility to that user, but it should be a service to that user. It should be a more utilitarian thing. But when you think about the aspirations and what somebody thinks and looks forward to in the future, that's where kind of prediction and AI, it's very easy for it to go astray. And it's the question of what can we do versus what should we do? And frankly, there's within most any user experience, inviting the user's explicit, this is what I want. Even it can be a 2-second interaction, can be so powerful. And that's what you can use to then leverage things like AI underneath the hood. So you're not trying to guess what they want. They're telling you exactly what they want. And then you're using AI to go and get that. That's really how it should be used.
Yeah. Should we be policing the future? So, I mean, if my past is predicting a bleak future, how or why, or should the technology creators be obliged to change that? Can a playful future help avoid that?
So I don't believe we should be, you can look at whether it's, Westworld or Minority Report or any slew of any other science fiction kind of analyses of this, that predicting patterns to kind of police what might happen, that's a moral choice that is not one that I think we should be making, right? The things that we need to be doing are really empowering that user and going back to what they want to have happen. And how do you have that be more likely? How do you make technology make something great more likely rather than having technology take a more pessimistic view and having it be, hey, here's what we think might happen, which is bad. And we need to stop that. And we need to do that at the expense of users. That's not something that I think is advantageous, right? That's great when it comes to weather prediction. But it is not great when it comes to people, because people are unpredictable. And so really getting back to how do you make the technology work for them is super critical.
Are there any things that you can see in the short term, where technology can enable like a social change to benefit a more diverse society?
I do. And that's, the connection and the communication that it provides. We already see that, right? You can be connected to everything and everyone at all times for all the time. So the real question, the real user experience to figure out is how do you kind of sift through that without it being overwhelming to users? And today we find that experience is on one hand energizing, but also is overwhelming in its long form. So I think the obligation is to how to make it simple and confidence inspiring. That's really where I think the patterns and the user experiences need to go. And much of that is just kind of a reframing of how we ask ourselves the question and what we choose to, give the user an interface to play with. Because it should be about getting to them to that something that they want to have happen, and how do we make that happen?
A lot of the reoccurring questions that we're getting from our audience are about AR and VR. And really along the lines of, look, is it a fad? Why hasn't there been household or mainstream penetration of AR and VR? So why is that? And what needs to be done for those technologies to really break through?
I think there's different companies have definitely taken different stances on the role of AR and VR. And on one hand, there can be tremendous kind of big industry use where you're using them to train, right? You're using it to train firefighters, people trying to build aircraft, right? And there's a real advantage to doing things like that. And you have the infrastructure to actually support what it costs to do that well and to build those projects. And then there's the use of AR and VR to really immerse yourself, right? To augment reality and bring new things into it. And there are a couple of things. Some are physiological. Some people just get dizzy with it, and it's something that they like. No matter kind of what that experience is, they're not going to get past that. Hey, I don't feel really well after using this, and that can be a problem. Some people are like, hey, I don't like how I look wearing this thing. That can be a problem. There's a bunch of different things that lead people to not kind of get in. And similarly, there's things they're like, hey, I've never been immersed like this, and I love it, and this is what I wish there was more like this. And so I think as technology makes it so that the device itself is cheaper, is easier to wear, starts to get around some of the kind of inner ear issues. Certainly, you're going to see more companies who are, already building stuff there continue to invest. And there are some companies who are like, hey, that's not an experience that we think might be as widespread as or pertinent to our industry as we want to go for. And so they're kind of standing by the side at the moment.
Yeah. So you're talking there about the hardware becoming more accessible. And I've also seen other examples, like there's the Xbox adaptive controller, which helps people who are differently abled, engage. Are there any other things you see to make the technology, whether it's in the world of gaming or other consumer tech, just become more accessible?
There are examples of that both in hardware and software and the way things are packaged. And I think the industry is still in many ways at the point where there's the kind of high watermarks, the zenith, right? The one thing that gets created that everybody points to and they're like, that's amazing and it's life-changing, and it is, and they're incredible. But I think there's really an obligation across technology to raise the floor, kind of to raise the overall experience across the board, in addition to having those kind of high watermarks. And that's, those are the things that are really going to matter, right? That's because it's across the board, it's universal. How do you make that part of, any kind of componentized design library that you're seeing from any company? How do you see that just being, well, of course, packaging, we're just doing it that way to make it easier to open. Like those things should just be embedded and not seem like, whoa, somebody did it right and that's amazing. But like, hey, kind of most people are doing it right, and that's actually what's amazing. And so you're seeing the industry get there. And I think those high watermark, those, things like the adaptive controller certainly accelerate that progress, right? Made everybody cry in the commercial in the Super Bowl in a good way, right? Everybody's like, yes, this is amazing. And it is, right? It's that connection. And certainly, Xbox is a place where all gamers are welcome and all games are welcome. And the entertainment industry is really, play is universal. And so you should be able to have something that everybody can get in and play.
Yeah. And look, Drew, we've had the lockdowns with COVID and the like recently, and in the time of isolation, that's kind of increased our need for that connection and that to be enabled digitally. How have your communities, your behaviours communicating with people changed, and have we learned any lessons around digital communication and online communities during this time?
COVID has provided both a horrible and a unique learning moment. And certainly the way we connect, some of the things that I've noticed is that, especially things like working from home, there are countless articles posted about, how to set boundaries, how to kind of clock in and clock out mentally so that, you're in home mode and then you're in work mode. There's a bunch of stuff around that. The thing that I found, just as a manager, to be the most important is to make sure that the people who are really, really emotionally impacted by it, right? They don't have as many people around them because maybe they're single for whatever reason. They just feel enclosed and they can't get out as much. Mm-hmm. There are definitely some people who it hits much harder than others. And you need to make sure that you're attending to their specific needs. Because certainly there are a number of people on my team and on teams around me where, it's like, hey, working from home is amazing. And I get to kind of sit here and crank and I'm so much more productive. But for everybody who kind of has had that happen, you also have somebody who's like, hey, this is beyond rough, and I really need to connect with people differently than I have before, and please help me do that. And technology certainly plays a role there. So does just good management and good people skills. And so we're seeing things get built that make those conversations easier. But really it's an investment in time, and it's an investment in people that you need to make to actually go that extra mile and make sure that everybody's okay, because it's, the working from home part is a tiny little part of just the disruption that's going on around people on the planet. And people react to that differently, and being really tuned in is super important, because that's where the new things coming into, whether it's the communications software that you're using or the piece of software that you're using to share ideas and, creatively sketch over one another's stuff. All of those things are, beholden to that actual conversation about how do you make sure that your team, the people around you, the family, everybody you care about, and everybody you can outreach to, are actually not falling through the cracks.
Yeah. And it's been really interesting for me here in New Zealand, having been in lockdown and then being out of lockdown, just seeing how people have adapted tools during lockdown, and then which ones they've chosen to continue, even though they may be back in the workplace or in a mixed environment as well. A lot of our audience in New Zealand watching today are in the local technology industry, and obviously we're a far smaller country, far smaller market than America or the global market. What advantages does New Zealand have in being small?
Small is usually fast. When I think about the expectation around, how some of what I spoke to today would come to the market, there are people and companies that are going to kind of iterate their way from today's thing to get there. And then you're going to have the small companies or people in tighter markets where they know the market really well. That's probably the place where you're going to get some big step function change that nobody expected, right? It's going to be a bet they're making on an experience that they're like, hey, nobody's seen anything like this before. Boom, here it is. And then everybody a week later is like, oh, I don't know how I, lived without this. It's amazing. And so the big kind of monolithic things where you're really looking at huge amounts of data or huge markets, it's just slower to do something. But when you're bringing something new to market, what works well in somewhere that you can experiment and put that thing out there quickly, probably is going to work well in a large market. But you don't have to kind of bear that burden up front. So I think you're really going to see innovation come out on a scale like nothing existed. Now it does, and it's amazing. And you're going to be able to contrast that to kind of some of the larger companies or larger experiences that are just trying to iteratively get there. And you might not get there by iterating. It might just need to be something that's a really big bet that you piled into an audience you could test, and you iterate super fast, and then, yep, it worked. And here you go. And now it's first mover.
Yep. Yeah, so how can New Zealanders get the best of those both worlds, of being small and nimble, yet taking advantage of the tools, even off-the-shelf tools that the monolithic or large platforms do provide? Are there any off-the-shelf technologies or emerging technologies that we could just take and run with? What would the first wave of a more playful future look like?
In terms of off-the-shelf, I think most of the technology exists. It's really, I think, more the research and design side where, we have all of that data, but we don't have the patterns to connect to users to. And that's really where I think the innovation is going to take front. Because when you look at things, like GitHub and the way that developers share code, open source stuff, there's a tremendous amount of tech out there. And certainly all of it would cover building the things that I mentioned today. But the experience side of it is the place where I think there's more to be done, because there is no repository for kind of any designer that I know of to go get that pattern or get that inspiration for an app. Once they have it, you can go get those off-the-shelf tools. And then, if you want to play with that app and do A to B experimentation in a much larger market, those tools for, hey, I can take this thing, we can publish it here, and we can publish it into this country, and we can publish it into that country. and we can learn the 3 things from these 3 countries that we want to know, great, we have Signal, now let's launch it worldwide. Those tools completely exist. So I think it's really more, how do we reframe how we think about what technology should do, leverage that explicit user signal, and build things that actually connect people to what should be their, wonderful future more easily.
Yep. And I think a lot of the audience could see this making sense for consumer apps and things, but what about business applications, line of business apps? Should we be making them more playful? Is that actually a good idea if all of a sudden my accounting software or my procurement tools, are playful?
So in terms of business applications, the best design is the smallest design. And I'll draw a line here between playful and gamification. And I'll draw that line specifically. There are intrinsic rewards and there are extrinsic rewards, right? There are things that people just find rewarding when they do them, and there are things which you're kind of trying to motivate somebody, whether it's a dollar bill or a shiny star or whatever you're giving them. You're trying to make them want that to do these things. Anything that is authentic to the experience, I would endorse. If it's not authentic, if it doesn't make it faster, if it doesn't make it easier to use, I would not layer it in. But you can think, so one example, perfect example, the videos that they show on airlines kind of about what to do, how to adjust your seat, where the, escape ramps are, all those things. Those videos used to be boring and nobody ever watched them. Then there was an element of playfulness introduced where they basically, created almost a Where's Waldo, where they had, unicorns in row 4, and there were these things that you were watching the video for to try and see if you noticed, because they were crazy. And that degree of playfulness made everybody watch those videos because they were entertaining. It made you consume that information. And that, if you're trying to get everybody to watch the safety program, like, that's the way you do it, right? You make it playful. And so it actually accomplishes the goal of getting those users through what's a pretty mundane task, but an important one because it's about safety. And so in that case, I would completely endorse it. Things that I would not endorse, there was a bit of run on kind of gamification where you're trying to bolt something on to an experience to make people use it more. Gamification, usually it's a purely extrinsic reward, and if it's not making, like, hey, here's my job and I need to do this thing faster, or I need to learn it more easily, if it's not actually helping that task, you should not introduce it. It's not worth the change in tone, because some things need to be taken seriously, and putting a playful element in it is not the right choice. Because if somebody's using software that is life and death, you don't want to have the tone, you don't want to have the text in there be playful, right? You want to have it be as serious as the subject matter. So there's certainly opportunity within kind of more industrial experiences to introduce playfulness, right? When you want people to learn, is a really powerful one. In terms of everyday use, I would always advocate for keeping the design authentic and as small, as clean as possible, so that it's super efficient and easy to understand.
Thank you very much, Chris. Thank you for your time today. That's been a really insightful and I think useful conversation for us all to have. So thank you very much. And thank you for everybody who's tuned in for today's presentation. Feel free to give us your feedback and to sign up to stay informed for more news about future events. Thank you.